Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down Bama going up to Wisconsin as well as Boston College playing Missouri and Columbia. Going to be very, very fun games this upcoming weekend, but I think the Friday night games might take the cake for me. These are two really, really fun games against four teams that are going to have plenty to say in a number of different ways for their conference race this upcoming year. But let's start with UNLV Kansas, because this is a very, very interesting game. UNLV has a Power 4 win this year over Houston, who is a questionable team, but did give Oklahoma a little run for their money this past weekend, and they scored 72 points this past week. Obviously, not a very good team that they were playing, but a remarkable performance on offense nonetheless, and I think that's the big thing here. Can Kansas slow down this UNLV offense? Because Brennan Marion, the OC over there, does an incredible job of switching up personnel groupings and using motion to be just so dynamic on the offensive side of the ball that it's so hard to get a beat on what's going to happen. There's so many two running back sets that you never really know what's going to come at you the next time. So it's really, really impressive what he's doing over there, and I think no matter who you are, no matter what defense you are, you're going to have to prepare for this UNLV offense a ton as you go into this game. And then Kansas coming off a loss where they gave away the ball 4 times. If they do that in this one, UNLV has a real shot, and I honestly might just pick them if they were going to give the ball away that many times to this offense. So it's going to be one of those things that Kansas is looking for a bounce back. UNLV is looking for a chance to become the G5 team going forward for the CFP race. But for me, you got to watch Ricky White. This is a very, very talented wide receiver for UNLV, one of the best wide receivers in the entire country, and one of those guys that no matter who he's on, it's going to be an equalizer. There's not a corner on this Kansas team that is not going to be on even footing with Ricky White, even though they have a lot of really good ones over there at Kansas. A very talented player and one that could cause all types of problems for that Kansas defense. And then on defense for UNLV, Jalen Catalon has jumped over from Arkansas to Texas to UNLV over the past couple of years, and this is a guy that can play on that level. He is very, very talented, can play in the run game, which he's going to need to in this game, as well as get back there and have a couple of picks, which he did in the Houston game. So a very talented player, one of those guys that has played at this level before and will definitely be ready to roll once he walks into that stadium on Saturday. For Kansas, Daniel Highshaw has to be huge in this game. You don't necessarily have an ability to spread the ball out just to the nth degree. I think you have wide receivers that you like, but the real team is the running back duo that they have, Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw, and I think Daniel Highshaw is that guy that's just going to wear down this UNLV team. You do have the size advantage, you have the talent and the physicality advantage, and if that running back is running through people throughout the day, then it's going to be really tough for UNLV to keep up. And then Kobe Bryant on the outside, the cornerback for Kansas, a very, very talented player, one of those guys that I don't care who he's matched up on, he can make a play on the ball. There is no doubt about that. Very good ball skills, and one of those guys that is likely going to get a lot of Ricky White on Saturday. So he's going to have to be ready to roll, and if he's not, then they're going to take advantage of this back end pretty easily, if I had to imagine. But how can UNLV pull off this upset? First of all, Matthew Sluka has to be a factor on the ground. There is no reality where they can win this game without him being a factor. He's actually their leading rusher right now with 129 yards, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 4 guys have over 100 yards this year for UNLV. So goes back to what I was talking about, a lot of 2 running back sets, a lot of sets that make life really, really tough for you and keep a lot of fresh legs in that game. So it's going to be awesome to watch this go to work and see if they can keep that Kansas defense off balance, but that quarterback run game is going to be huge to do that. And then get Ricky White out in space. This is the guy that could play on essentially any roster across the country, especially Kansas. I can almost promise you he could play on Kansas's roster right about now. So get him out in open space. Allow him chances to play one-on-one with some of these players because there's not a lot of people that can stop this guy in open space, especially some guys that maybe tackling isn't necessarily their big-time thing over there at Kansas. Well, I don't want to say that. They're very solid tacklers on that outside, but when you have Ricky White in open space, you can be a great tackler and not necessarily have a shot to take him down. And then finally, slow the run game down as best you can. You're not going to stop Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw fully, but UNLV has been really good about this year. Has only given up 52.5 rushing yards per game, and then Kansas on the other side has rushed for 258.5 yards per game. So two very, very different worlds, and you're going to have to find the middle ground somewhere if you're UNLV, and you hope it's a little bit closer to that 52 than that 258 at the end of the day. But moving on to matchups to watch, this DC versus OC matchup is going to be fascinating. We've talked about this Brennan Marion offense a ton throughout this, and this is going to be the thing that likely decides this game. If Kansas cannot keep up with this offense and cannot get a beat on what's going to happen next, then UNLV is going to be able to score with them, and it's going to be a problem for them down the stretch when maybe Jalen Daniels makes one of the mistakes that he made last week and you run into some trouble. So we're going to have to watch this one, and Brennan Marion is one of the best OCs in the entire country, so Brian Borland's going to have his hands full, that is for sure. And then Ricky White against these Kansas DBs. We keep talking about Ricky White, but I'm telling you, this is the guy that they have to get involved if they're going to win this game because he is as good as any player on that field on Saturday. So very, very talented player and one of those guys that it could be the decider if he gets going. And if he's the guy that really changes this game, I would not be surprised by any means. And then the Kansas run game against that front seven for UNLV, you have the size advantage if you're Kansas. You should be able to walk in there and run the ball to victory, but maybe UNLV can cause some problems on that front side. They've played obviously very well up until this point. This is an entirely different ball game, obviously, but it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of attack this, and frankly, I think this is going to be a really, really fun game. I think it's going to be close down to the wire, but I do think Kansas gets it done. I think there's enough intensity in that program right now to bounce back from that loss to Illinois a week ago that they'll get it going in this game. I think UNLV is plenty good to stick around for long enough and cause some problems for Kansas, but I do think Kansas wins in maybe some dramatic fashion on Friday night. And then moving forward to what should be a conference game, but is not quite yet. These two teams are still playing out of conference for the time being until next year, and then they will officially be conference opponents. So kind of a weird wrinkle into this game, but we do have Kansas State favored by a little bit over a touchdown. 58.5 is the over-under, and this one got a lot more interesting this past weekend because neither of these teams played very good football this past weekend. So it made you think maybe both these teams could play with each other or maybe there's one team that could totally pull away. But regardless, we saw some holes in these teams this past weekend, and I think both these teams are just really ready to get on the field and possibly expose some of those for the other team, and it's going to be awesome to watch this one unfold. But on the Arizona side, you got to watch Ja'Cory Croskett Merritt. They have to have a running game in this. They have to have anyone step up in the run game in this game if they're going to have a shot, because the reality is last week the run game was fine, but the pass game was terrible because they couldn't get quite enough going on the ground to open up some of those passing lanes, really, for Tatoria McMillan and just about no one else. And we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But then you have Jacob Manu on the other side. Avery Johnson is a very special player and one of those guys that we talked about a little bit ago with Thomas Castellanos. Those linebackers are going to have to come ready because I think they're going to unlock a little bit more of that quarterback run game for Kansas that they haven't been thus far throughout the season. I think they break that glass this upcoming weekend. I think they go into that quarterback run game a little bit more aggressively, and that means Jacob Manu and his boys at the linebacker position are going to have to really be playing A+ football on Friday, excuse me. And then Keenan Johnson on the other side, a huge wide receiver for Kansas State. We know Kansas State can run the ball. We know they have the ability to do that. We know J.C. Brown is a very talented wide receiver for them, but they need more guys. If they're going to be able to compete in the Big 12 throughout the season, they just have to be able to spread the ball out more than they are right now. And Keegan Johnson is one of those very confident receivers that you feel pretty good about when you throw the ball in his direction. So getting this guy involved early on Friday is going to be huge for this team, and I think for the rest of the season, really, he's going to be absolutely huge for this squad. And then you have Jacob Parrish on the other side, a huge cornerback, and he's going to get a lot of McMillan duty in this game. He's going to have to be absolutely fully ready to go, and if he's not, then we could be seeing another incredible performance from T-Mac this upcoming on Friday. And then, how can Arizona pull this off? And frankly, not too much of an upset because obviously both these teams are very capable, ranked matchup. But at the end of the day, they have to be able to scheme T-Mac open. Because the reality is, last week he had 2 catches, 11 yards, and Northern Arizona came close to beating you. So you've given away the formula. You've given away everything that people need to do to stop you, which is essentially stop that guy, stop number 4. If you can stop number 4, then you're going to have a lot of success against this Arizona team. So this back end can be taken advantage of. We saw it last week against Tulane, and Tulane doesn't have T-Mac. So if you can scheme this guy open, if you can get him the ball early, it's going to be nearly impossible for Kansas State to stop this passing attack. And then rotate the running backs very consistently. You have two really solid running backs in Croskett Merritt and Conley. Both are very capable. I think Conley's a better pass catcher, so likely more of a third down back there. But the reality is throwing both these guys at this defense is a must. You're going to have to make sure that this run game is as fresh as possible because Kansas State is going to be able to stop you on the other side if you do not keep these guys fresh. And if you can't get a run game going, then that pass game is going to look a lot like it did this past weekend. And then as we talked about, elite linebacker play is what they need from Jacob Manu and Ty Brown, two very talented players, but they're going up against a guy that can make your life just terrible for an afternoon or for a night in this scenario. But two very talented players, and one of those guys just needs to play huge in this game and is probably going to be chasing down Avery Johnson at least a couple of times in this one, if I had to imagine. Matchups to watch: McMillan against Parrish or Keenan Garber. Whoever is getting his assignment, this is going to be a game changer. If they can at least keep this guy under wraps, it doesn't need to be perfect by any means because he's about impossible to fully keep under wraps. But at the end of the day, if they can hold serve with him at the very least, they're going to feel really good about their chances here. And then Avery Johnson against these linebackers. I just think they have to start running this guy more. They are not running Avery Johnson nearly enough, and that's part of what makes their offense so dynamic. So I expect to see a lot more of that on Friday, and I think if these linebackers don't come ready, then Avery Johnson could run all over him, and Kansas State could totally run away with this game. And then the Kansas State O-line against the Arizona D-line. When you talk about KSU, they want to run the ball. They're not going to be able to beat you really downfield all that often, at least if they're not able to run the ball. So Arizona's D-line, who lost a number of big-time players like Bill Norton and Tia Savea this past offseason, has to play better football this weekend, has to be ready to combat that run game because if they can't, there's going to be a long day at the office. And frankly, I think Kansas State finds something on Friday. I think they have the ability to really find something where they have not utilized this quarterback run game nearly enough. And I think they have the ability to crack that glass ceiling and be able to open up so much stuff in their game. I just think they haven't because of the opponent on the other side. And that's no disrespect to Tulane, but the reality is you likely didn't need Avery Johnson in harm's way early on in the season. Now you're about to get into conference play. So I think they open up that playbook just a little bit more. And I think Arizona's defense, as fun as it is and has some really, really solid players across it, like Takario Davis, like Jacob Manu, I think it's just too much for them to handle. So I think Kansas State finds something, subsides some of those worries for their fans early on in the season, and gets a big-time win. Although it's not a conference win, still a big-time win over a ranked opponent. And those games, frankly, I cannot wait for. There are so many games on Saturday that are going to be really fun, but you'd be hard-pressed to find two games that are going to be more fun in the same time than these two. These are going to be awesome to watch, and I think UNLV has a real shot to make some noise, and then who knows what happens against Arizona and Kansas State. But at the end of the day, whether or not it's a conference game or not, it's going to have an effect on that conference and the confidence of these teams heading into conference play. So, going to be awesome to watch those games. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of an upset alert for week 3. Who is on upset alert? How much are they on upset alert? And what could go wrong? And if it does go wrong, how bad could it be on the other side of it for these teams? So, we'll break it down right after this. So, stick with us.